Hey, so I just spent the last week and a half just doing nothing but playing video games because we had a lovely time of the month that was like really bad mentally. So I was like, I just need to chill. And of course, that means I have nothing to talk about this week either because I haven't written, I've still been playing video games. So we're gonna do a story time while I look after this little girl right here. Interestingly enough, this is related to the games I was playing. I played Tomb Raiders, the first two of the new remakes. And if you haven't played them, they are an experience. So here's the deal: the gameplay, very fun, the story, terrible. You're not going to find accurate information about anything in there. Oh my god. So the first game, it takes place in an island off of the coast of Japan. So it's like Japanese culture they're diving into. And it was painful whenever like one of the lore items came up because you find little documents of people who've been there. Just to illustrate, okay, there's this one. It was like such a slap to the face when I read it. It was a diary by a young girl getting chosen to be the next queen or whatever of the island. She says, "My name is Hoshi, daughter of Hiro and Kokoro." Sure, Jan. That is just like the corniest, weebiest thing ever. Also, Hiro, Hiro is a man's name. Hiro, which was in the document, is a woman's name. So it was two women's names, first of all, which was a mistake. You know, especially for like 1600s Japan. Okay, and then just the names, it's very cringe. It's very, I'm 14 and I just got into anime and I really like Japanese culture, which is nothing wrong with that. I just don't think it should be in a AAA game that had an entire team of people that was supposed to like do real research for an actual like freaking historical fiction game. You know what I mean? So that's the level that we're working on here. So what is my point? My point is I started playing the second game. And after all of that, you know, all of the exposure to the weeb Japan, I start this new game. We're in Syria, and I'm like, okay, we're gonna be racist against the Middle Easterns now, okay. But we leave Syria very quickly. We only meet one guy, and he just dies immediately. And all of a sudden, we're in Siberia. Shit got real. And I'm like, okay. Maybe it'll just be, you know, we're in the wilderness again. We only met one guy last time. Sweet summer child I was. So the first document we come across is Mongolian. It's a Mongolian document. Very trash truck just drove by, very thematic here. And I'm like, oh crap. Now it's gonna be racist against me. Here it comes. So luckily that didn't actually, well, okay, let me let me back it up a little bit. The Mongolian angle didn't actually come to fruition because there was only like a couple documents here and there about the Mongolians, and then at the end of the game we see the I don't know what they're called. The tower siege things, the tall things that like you push up to the wall and climb up the wall. So that was basically it for the Mongolians, okay? However, I'm also Russian, and it was very heavily about the Soviet Union. And that was heavy-handed. We're talking we go through a gulag with like, you know, people hanging from the gates, from the train yards, and there's hammer sickles everywhere. And two of the quests that you do is one, you cut down all the communist flags, and then another one you burn like posters, like propaganda posters. I think they were cosmonauts, you know, the we're gonna get to the moon, blah blah blah. And you have to burn them. So, you know, that's the kind of game it is. So it is kind of interesting though, because you find all these documents of people who are in the gulag. You find photos of them. You find diary entries of the guards at the gulag, and like the cages that people were kept in. And you know, it's not entirely inaccurate, but also like I've played the previous game, so I know how freaking wild, how many liberties they take with this. But at the same time, I have less knowledge about this, so I can't fact check it as much on the fly. So I'm just like, okay, this is just, it's Hollywood, Soviet Union. This is how it relates back to me and my family. My grandfather made tanks for the Soviet army during World War II. Like, he didn't make tanks by himself, and he was a steel worker. He worked on them. And great grandfather was straight up a Cossack. I've seen like the photos of him and his like big hat and his horse and stuff. It was like, okay, we got some history in this family. So you'd find these documents everywhere and be like, oh, it's the Red Army. Oh, they're evil. I'm like, oh crap. Oh. So my family doesn't really talk too much about our past, So I've got like a patchwork knowledge of this whole situation. Don't know anything about great-grandparents other than like the one questionable, obviously. It was talked about, I was like, it was like a cool thing, when I was first told about it, like, oh, wasn't that so cool? And then you learn about the Cossacks and you're like, okay. But my grandfather, he did work for the Soviet army during World War II. And if you know anything about Russia, like that whole area in World War II, like everyone died. So it was not talked about, obviously. My mother and my aunt and stuff, they knew like the old country people. I didn't know any of them. Like after my grandfather died, that whole line got cut off. And my grandfather died when my mother was like 9 years old. But like my aunt in particular, because she was a little older, she remembers him more. She's very particular about Russian things. Like, I made borscht one day, and she was like, oh, you think you can make borscht, huh? But when my grandfather came to this country, they were like, hey, your name is way too Russian. Change it. He went from Nikolai Ignatov to Nicholas Ignatow. We still pronounce our name Ignatov, but it's not spelled like that. So that's an interesting start to his life here. And then he met my grandmother, who was also Mongolian, but she's from Belgium. She was also in Belgium during World War II, also never spoke of it. Also died before I was born. So once again, secondhand stories. So like the only thing she would say about World War II was that there was no chocolate. Because, Belgium surrendered, they let themselves get taken over. And eventually, like my aunts and my mom kind of got her to say something about it. And she was saying that she was ashamed of Belgium because they surrendered. They basically traded the buildings for the people. And that was like the only thing she said about it. So it was interesting. So they met here, they got married, and had my one aunt and my mom. My grandmother had 2 other children from her first husband, who was a Polish pilot. So I don't know anything about that guy, but my uncle had some hang-ups about him dying very young. Obviously it was his dad, but then it got transferred down to us because we were not the real family. It's a whole bunch of family drama. Anyway, so she remarries my grandfather, okay, and she's Roman Catholic. He's Buddhist, which is an interesting combination. So my aunts and mom, I don't know if my uncle had to go. He probably had to go too. But they would go to temple on Saturday and mass on Sunday. It was a big mess. It was definitely a big mess, which is why I ended up being raised with nothing, because they got so messed up in the head from that. They were like, let's just raise her without religion. She could choose later. So now I'm an atheist. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent here. He spoke Russian. My grandmother spoke French. And it's like both of their English is really bad. So that's kind of how my mom and my aunt grew up. Like, they grew up speaking Russian. And then they went to school speaking Russian very bad in the 60s. They were like, if you keep on speaking Russian to these children, they will not be able to attend school. So, boom, Russian cut off, which I'm kind of mad about because now I can't speak Russian. It did not get passed down to me. I can kind of read, but I don't know what I'm reading. So I missed out twice on being born bilingual, My dad ditched and he spoke Spanish. Like, if he would have stayed together with my mom, I would be speaking Spanish fluently. And then I missed out on the Russian thing. Back to the grandfather. Grandfather is steelworker. So he was a steelworker here in New Jersey. It was a huge thing in this area. He was part of the Steelworkers Union, which you may know was run by the mob. My mother and my aunts, they would go to the union picnics, right? And my grandfather would like take them up to the table with all like the mafia guys and make them like curtsy, like pay your respects, curtsy to the mafia guys. And one of those guys, interestingly enough, Jimmy Hoffa. So my mother personally curtsied to Jimmy Hoffa. It's very New Jersey. So anyway, we went from Hoshi, son of Kokoro and Hiro, all the way down to Jimmy Hoffa. Tomb Raider brings us all together. On a final note though, because this is the only place I can complain about it, you know, going back to the video game, right? Why do we need to destroy so much? She's a Tomb Raider. She's stealing so much stuff from these dead people. But she's British, you know. Some of the tombs that you raid, you have to blow up shit, like these whole structures. The last one I did, you have to. There's like a dead body, and it was bad. It was actually something that probably happened back then. But like it was a person who was in an exorcism, and they had submerged in a cage underwater and like drowned there, and the body was still under there. So you raise the cage up, and then you blow something up, and it like swings the body like a freaking battering ram to break a door. So you break a door down with a body. It's a bit much. I was definitely side-eyeing that one. But anyway, I hope the sound wasn't too bad on this because I'm not filming on my computer. And maybe I will have something progress related to share next week instead of like weird. I don't even know if this qualifies as story time. I'm gonna call it that though. But anyway, I'll see you guys.